This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson, where I project him ranking and importance to the Cleveland Browns in 2024. I'm going to put him 6. I don't think he's in the top 5 yet of Cleveland Browns. I think he's 6. I think it's a good place for him to be. Now, some might think, how is your quarterback not in your top 5, in your top 3 of your team? Is that a horrible sign for what you have going forward? And I don't think that's necessarily true. Other quarterbacks who I would probably rank outside the top 5, but like within the top 10 of their team when it comes to where they are as far as the best players on that team, I will put Tua. Tua would probably be 6 on the Dolphins. Jalen Hurts would probably be 6 or 7th on the Philadelphia Eagles. Brock Purdy would probably be 6 on the San Francisco 49ers. Jared Goff. You can play for a lot of good. There's a lot of good teams in there. Every team that I mentioned, every quarterback that I mentioned, they're a playoff team, and outside of maybe the Dolphins, legitimate contenders there. So that's why I have Deshaun Watson starting off. Why? Well, the small sample size in 2023 makes me feel like, based on what I've seen, if he stays healthy, this is his most probable landing spot. Is there a chance he could be a little worse? I think a little bit of a chance. I don't think it's a great chance. Is there a chance that he could be better than this and break into a higher tier? I think, again, a little bit of a chance. A better chance that he breaks out of this tier than he falls out of it by being bad. But not like a great chance that he breaks out of this tier either. I think this is kind of where he's most likely to end up. You know, in that same tier of quarterbacks that Tua, Jalen Hurts, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Jordan Love, like those guys belong to. And yeah, there's some room to jump up and down, and maybe some of those quarterbacks give you an elite year and then come back down to that category. But I think that's kind of where he could sit this year, or where I project him most likely ending up here is in that kind of territory. And you can win a Super Bowl with this territory of quarterback. I firmly think Matt Stafford was this realm of quarterback when he won his Super Bowl in 2021. So it's not like oh, you can't win a Super Bowl, you can't have serious expectations if your quarterback is not one of the best 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. But if this is where your quarterback is, you're in a pretty good spot. Now, some people are going to ask me, why isn't he ranked lower than 6? Why is he so high on the list? Because I think some people do feel like Deshaun Watson is like actively one of the worst players on the Browns. And I think that is a very warped perception that some people have. But if you're asking me, why is he as high as number 6? His 4th quarter performance has been pretty impressive in his small stay in Cleveland, especially what he did in the small sample size last year. His season last year, I felt like, was encouraging when you look at it within the context. I left the rewatch of Deshaun Watson's season last year encouraged, thinking, oh, yeah, it's definitely on the table for him to be this way. And that's because the stats that he put out, you know, when you put them in context, they're actually a little bit more impressive than I think a lot of people get out. You know, I did this with Jake Burns. Jake Burns watched Deshaun Watson play. He came out much more encouraged. That season last year, if you're just looking at it objectively and you watch the games, not just read them, you watch the games, most people who know what they're talking about and willing to be fair about what they're watching come out thinking, yeah, it's possible Deshaun Watson's still really good. And that he played pretty good in most of those games. He's also not shown any drop off in physical ability. I know a lot of people say he's cooked, but in order for a player to be cooked, there has to be a significant drop off in physical ability. He still does all of the same stuff that he was able to do in 2020 from a physical standpoint. He still breaks a ton of sacks. He still can run very well, just as well as he did in Houston. He still can throw on the run very well, just as well as he did in Houston. The arm talent is still there. Even in this small injury-ridden sample that is 2023, all the physical abilities that you expect Deshaun Watson to be capable of were shown in those 5 games that he played last year, leaving me to think that this is somebody who's more than capable of being able to produce at a high enough level to be on that tier of quarterbacks that Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy and 2021 Matt Stafford and current Jared Goff kind of occupy. Mentally, if you're wondering if there's been a drop off there, I see no real signs of any drop off there. His playmaking and decision making have still been pretty good for the most part. There are times where he does have a bad game with some bad decision making, but every quarterback's going to have a bad game and make some bad decisions over the course of a season. I don't think like the Pittsburgh game is enough to be like, oh man, he doesn't make the same amount of decisions, because honestly, the decision making in the Pittsburgh game wasn't a problem in that game. The one thing with Deshaun Watson is that he's looked uncomfortable, but I don't think he's looked confused. Like, I don't worry about him not being physically or mentally capable of performing at a high level. I think the question is, can you get him in an offense that fits him? Can you get him comfortable? And can he get comfortable from not just a physical standpoint, but from a mental standpoint? And that's more about like mental health. He talked earlier this week about how, he's come to grips about how he's just going to be a polarizing figure. And I think a lot of people took that quote and ran with it a bunch of different ways. To me, after listening to his quotes for like years, I was more encouraged by that, because it indicates to me that he at least understands that he's a polarizing figure and that he's not going to have universal love, and that's just not going to be what it is for him. And I think if he can clear his mind from all of that and not be so obsessed with how he's perceived or how people view him and just focus on the football, I think he'll be fine. Now, if you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're wondering why is he not higher on this list, why is he not in the top 3 up there with presumably Nick Chubb, Denzel Ward, Myles Garrett, etc., I can't, if I say your top 5 of this team, given how damn good this roster is, I'm saying I believe you to be an all-pro level player at your position. I can say that for 5 Browns right now. I cannot say that for Deshaun Watson, because I can't say that you're going to be an all-pro quarterback straight up off vibes. And right now, if I say that about Deshaun Watson, it's more off vibes than it is off evidence, right? Like, as much as I like the 2023 sample, it's a very small sample. It's not a project him to be an all-pro player sample. It's just not that big of a sample there for me to go off of. And the sample he provided was not an all-pro level sample, right? I thought he was impressive. I thought he was much better than average in those games, but I didn't think he was like all pro level or anything like that. Like, it wasn't there. Also, him and Kevin Stefanski, Deshaun Watson and Kevin Stefanski, have to prove that they can create a game plan, well, not a game plan, but a plan offensively that Deshaun Watson looks comfortable in. The truth is, Deshaun hasn't played a lot of games, and maybe that plays into the comfort. But we said this in 2022, doesn't look like he's running what he's used to. We said this in 2023, doesn't look like he's comfortable with what he's running, or he's running what he's used to. And now in 2024, we're wondering if that's going to change again now that they have a new offensive coordinator. Now, I think this is the best chance for this to happen and the best swing that Kevin has taken at this happening. I think for a lot of reasons, the collaboration process, having guys experience with how Deshaun Watson plays, being factored into the decision making of what you do, having somebody with experience, all of that stuff factors into why I feel much better about the Browns being able to create a plan offensively that Deshaun Watson is comfortable in. But again, you're talking about me ranking him up here with some of the guys who are arguably the best players at their position, or at least all pro caliber players. You really got to show that Like, I can't just do that off vibes, right? Everybody else in this top 5 has shown that for at least 2 years. With Deshaun Watson, we're still waiting to see. Can't put you in the top 5 off vibes. So that's one of my main reasonings for him not being in the top 5. Another thing I think people need to consider is there were a lot of arguments that Deshaun Watson was a top 5 quarterback in 2020, and that if he plays at the 2020 level, he will be a top 5 quarterback in 2024. I don't think that line of logic translates the way some people think it translates. Deshaun Watson, you can make the argument, and it's a good argument, that he was a top 5 caliber quarterback in 2020. And that's true. But think about that term, top 5. Top 5, the definition of top 5 is truly dependent on who else is considered for top 5. So what is top 5 in 2020 with the quarterbacks that were playing in 2020 is not the same thing as what's top 5 now. Since Deshaun Watson had that season in 2020, there have been like at least 3 quarterbacks that have entered the league and made their mark. Hell, what the 2022, well, not 2020, the 2019 draft, I believe the one with Joe Burrow in it. Maybe that's the 2020 draft. That draft alone has 5 quarterbacks who have gotten paid $200+ million. That means since Deshaun Watson has played his last season in Houston, 5 quarterbacks have entered the conversation at least. More on top of that, right? Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, lots of guys have entered into this conversation. So what was a top 5 season in 2020, or what was considered top 5 in 2020? It's not the same thing in 2024. And my question is, hey, if Deshaun Watson had that season in 2024 that he had in 2020, is that even like, is he going to be top 5? And one of the arguments that I made was, hey, if you look at Dak Prescott's season that he had in 2023, it is very comparable from an advanced analytics standpoint, from a just regular old stats standpoint, to what Deshaun Watson produced in 2020. And a lot of people, the second they heard Dak, Deshaun Watson, got mad. Told me how Dak's not top 5, how Dak's not that good. See what I mean? It changes. Top 5 in 2020, maybe he was top 5 in 2020. And the numbers indicate that he was top 5 in 2020. But so many quarterbacks have entered the conversation since 2020 that we have no clue where Deshaun Watson, even at his best, would truly rank amongst this crop of quarterbacks. That's the question. That's the question we don't have the answer to. Even at his best, if he plays the best football he's capable of, where does that rank? We have no clue. There's no definitive way to put it. Is that going to be Dak Prescott class quarterback play in this modern era? Or, well, not modern era. He didn't play. 2020 wasn't that long ago. But is that going to be Dak Prescott class in 2024? What was considered top 5 in 2020? We don't know the answers to those questions because we need to see a lot more when it comes to Deshaun Watson from a he needs to play more games standpoint. Point blank, period. Another thing with Deshaun Watson, why I couldn't put him any higher than 6, his play style is going to have to adjust this year. Now, it's not going to be completely different than what he did or what he does, but it's going to have to slightly adjust, right? He's going to have a quicker timer to get rid of the ball. He's going to have to just let plays die. He's going to have to understand that the Browns don't need him to be the best player on the team. I think that is the most underrated transition Deshaun Watson has had to make by being traded to the Cleveland Browns. Because like I mentioned, right, if he would have got traded to Carolina, if he would have got traded to Atlanta, he would have been in the situation that he was used to being in Houston, where at least on the offensive side of the ball, he had to be the guy. He had to be everything for the offense that he was on. Yeah, you had some wide receivers there in Houston, and you had Duke Johnson, but it was down to Deshaun Watson to get something done. That's not the case in Cleveland. It's never been the case for him in Cleveland. It's not going to all be on Deshaun Watson to get it done because you have Nick Chubb, because you have David Njoku, because you have Amari Cooper, because you have all of these other things that the Browns can do very well. This is a Browns football team that was able to win 11 games last year with not just Deshaun Watson injured, but 26% of the salary cap injured, which is the best win percentage any team has had with that percentage of injuries on the salary cap ever. That suggests to me that this is not a team where we need Deshaun Watson to dive for every yard because we can't get it if Deshaun Watson doesn't get it. There are going to be times where he might have to dive. There are going to be times where he feels like he has to dive to get a first down, but he doesn't. If he gets it to 3rd and 1, we got plenty of options to get that first down. There are going to be times where he feels like he needs to dive to get a first down on 3rd down, but it's fine. Kevin Stefanski will go for it on 4th down if it makes sense. You don't got to do that. Those are the adjustments I think Deshaun Watson needs to make. It's not that he needs to play a completely different way than he plays now. He just needs to be aware of how much less the Browns require him to do when he goes out there to try to make a play. There were times last year where Deshaun was willing to put his shoulder into the chest of linebackers, put his shoulders into the chest of defensive ends to try to get 3 or 4 extra yards. And he just doesn't need to do that. The Browns, if you can't score on offense, the Browns have the best defense in football. If Deshaun Watson does not score himself, that's fine. You got other guys on the team that can score. Some people call it hero ball. I think this is just Deshaun Watson being a football product of his football environment. He has been put in positions constantly to make it happen, no matter what. And when you're constantly put in that position, you're constantly going to put your body at risk for a minimal gain, because if you don't do it, nobody's going to do it. But that's not the case here in Cleveland. He has to adjust that. That's going to take a little bit of an adjustment. He talks about it on his podcast all the time, and it's pretty encouraging when you hear him talk about that on the podcast, especially how he talks about how the Chiefs game kind of was a realization for him of how differently he can operate in the NFL when he has a good team like the Cleveland Browns have for him. When I think of Deshaun Watson, and if you're a hip hop head, you'll enjoy this one. When I think of Deshaun Watson, I think of Chance the Rapper. Now, for those of you who are aware of Chance the Rapper, you might know where I'm going with this. But for those of you who aren't, just know that Chance the Rapper around 2012 to like 2017 had everything on lock. I believe he won a Grammy for a coloring book, his second or his first studio album. Acid Rap, which was a mixtape that he released, was one of the most acclaimed mixtapes of its era. And it seemed like Chance the Rapper was next up. Everybody loved Chance the Rapper from like 2012 to 2015. It was one of them things. And Deshaun Watson is kind of the same story, right? When Deshaun Watson came out of Clemson, won that national championship in his first few years in Houston, everybody loved Deshaun Watson. Everybody was telling us that Deshaun Watson was up next. That's what the environment was. He was seen as the next guy. They loved hyping him up. And then 2021 happens for both of them. Now, Chance the Rapper has no off the field issues to the extent that Deshaun does. So those two things aren't comparable. But what is comparable is that the status of both of those guys has dropped significantly in 2021. They both had a fall from grace. They both had what I like to call, and if you know, you know, a hot shower. Chance the Rapper dropped the big day, and the perception on him has never been the same. Deshaun Watson had 2021, and the perception on him has never been the same. A reputation forever stained, and also reactions to that stain by those people, Chance the Rapper and Deshaun Watson, that also further cemented the issues that they would have to deal with going forward. It went from Chance the Rapper is up next. If you don't love Chance, you're an idiot, to Everybody got Chance jokes. I done made so many Chance the Rapper jokes over the last few years. Like, if you talk about a fall off, Chance the Rapper, somebody gonna reference Chance the Rapper on the fall off, right? Like, he always catching strays for falling off. That's just where Chance is. And that reputation hit for Chance the Rapper really took its toll to the point to where he kind of just went away. Like, Chance went from this dude who was everywhere. He was on commercials. He was on ads. He was on everything, getting awards everywhere. He went from this ubiquitous figure to this thing we forgot about. Same thing you could say happened to Deshaun Watson, right? Deshaun Watson went from everybody's favorite quarterback that's not on their team to a pariah. Somebody nobody wants to be associated with. Then with Chance, you started to see him drop some random singles, right? Some snippets here and there, some experimental music videos. And what you saw was encouraging, but not necessarily a cohesive body of work. I think that's what 2023 was for Deshaun Watson. Some snippets, some singles, some of them shits banged, but it wasn't no cohesive album or even an EP or LP. It wasn't a mixtape. Like, it wasn't something you could really grab to and go, oh, okay, yeah, this is what it is again. It was just little things here and there, right? Little bits and pieces. There's room for Chance the Rapper to make a comeback and rap. Definitely. There's energy for Chance the Rapper to make a comeback and rap. But for that to happen for Chance the Rapper can't be the same dude that he was in 2012 or in 2015. He has to be a different Chance the Rapper. He has to be a evolved Chance the Rapper, because what people were saying in a reaction to the big day was, we tired of this shit. Same thing is true for Deshaun Watson. There's room for Deshaun Watson to make a comeback. There's even energy for it, as much as that might sound crazy. But I think there's a lot of people who be cautiously excited about Deshaun Watson playing good football again, mainly because they want the Browns to be good. But still, there's energy for Deshaun Watson to make a comeback. But for Deshaun Watson to make a comeback, he can't run the same plays or do the same raps that he was doing in Houston. It's got to be different. It's got to be a different version of Deshaun Watson. And that's the question we will find out about during this 2024 season. It is possible that Deshaun Watson could be as high as number 1 next year, or maybe even in the top 3, right? And we know who's in the company of the top 3 of this Cleveland Browns team. It's elite company. Like, if you're in the top 3 of this roster, the way that it's constructed, you're probably one of the 3 best players in your position group. That's what being top 3 on this roster means now. It's not just empty. And it's possible for Deshaun Watson to get there. But for Deshaun Watson to get there, it's going to have to be different than it was in Houston. It's going to have to be an evolved version of Deshaun Watson, not 2020 Watson. We got to talk about 2024 Watson being the best version of him. But we'll see. That's why I have him ranked at number 6. Let me know what y'all think in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.